7lt.org. So this week's topic, we're going to be talking about the American Radio Relay League and the benefits. And I see Dan has joined. So welcome, Dan. Dan is actually going to give us a kind of just a brief history of the ARRL.
Sure. Let's see. I'm trying to figure out, I think 105 or 106 years old. And real briefly, the origins go back to, the beginning days of radio. And I think 1915 was the first year that the league organized and established itself. And part of the big push, well, there were a number of things, but probably the single biggest event was the sinking of the Titanic, which was the first use of radio, in that type of environment, where it was trying to avert a major disaster. And basically, the amateur radio operators were not organized prior to this time, but many of them had superior stations to the government or governments that were involved, like the Navy, the U.S. Navy, and others. And so there was, some disorganization and some jealousy and some other things on the part of the government and the Navy, and also a desire to try to regulate things because there was no regulation, there were no call signs. You picked your own call sign, and usually it was, your initials. So, we can go into a lot of detail, but basically, Hiram Percy Maxim, who was a fairly wealthy inventor, started organizing amateur radio operators, and he had one of the best stations of the time. And also their goal was to attempt to relay messages across the United States and across North America. So what he did is start to organize stations, in various regions so they could communicate across the country and back again. And then again, this is the infancy of the telephone system and the telegraph system. So they pretty quickly, proved their skill, and thus the name, American Radio Relay League, which these days, seems kind of anachronistic to us. But he started organizing amateurs so they could do things such as lobby the government, for regulations, and a variety of other activities. And, they started publishing a magazine, started improving the technical art of radio, which is in its infancy. At that time, they were using what's called the spark method, which basically is a pretty incredibly crude system where using what's called a spark gap, which is basically like lightning. You're controlling lightning, and it's creating a large burst of radio energy that would cover in what we would consider these days an incredible range of frequencies. So there was no tubes, no transistors, none of this type of technology. So the typical range of a spark station might be 100 to 200 miles. If you had a really powerful spark station, you might reach 1,000. But that was just sort of some of the best. So anyway, out of all this, the magazine Qst evolved, and all the technical art, plus the regulation and the lobbying for government activities and organizing amateurs, which continues to this day. It's still the most valuable organization that we have as hams. And almost all of the privileges, that we have as hams, you can directly point to the influence of the American Radio Relay League. So that's why it's such a valuable organization. It still is to this day. So there's, the brief sketch.
One of the stories I really like, and I don't exactly remember when this happened, Dan, maybe you can shed some more light on it, but essentially the commercial versus the amateurs, and the commercial people kind of saw the value in radio communication. And so the slice of radio frequencies that they said the commercial people wanted, and the slice that are worthless, and they were given to the hams.
Well, what it was known as at the time was the ultra short waves, which actually was basically right above the end of the broadcast band. If you think of your AM radio as 550 to 1600 kilohertz, or kilocycles as it was called in those days, anything above that was considered, useless territory. So the government and the commercial enterprises and the military said, oh, give it to the hams because they'll be out of their way, because they wanted the frequencies that were lower because they thought that those are going to be the most valuable. Well, within the space of a few short years, hams started demonstrating this entirely new phenomenon, which was known as skip. In other words, the radio waves would actually bounce off the ionosphere, and you could send a radio wave, 5 to 10 times farther, with very low power, comparatively speaking, and simpler technology. And that persists to this day, although there's still always pressure. There's always commercial enterprises trying to take away our frequencies, and monetize them. So this is still one of the big functions of the ARRL, is to hang on to our frequencies.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dan.
Sure.
And I want to just bring up the website of the ARRL. So this, if you were to go to the ARRL.org, this is the website that comes up. They're kind of their front page. There are a ton of benefits to becoming a member of the ARRL. You can get your ham radio license without becoming a member, and many people do. However, becoming a member not only helps protect the frequencies that we have currently and potentially getting new frequencies, but it also comes with a lot of benefits. And I think the one benefit that everybody kind of is aware of or knows of is Qst Magazine. And that's kind of the official, and let me just kind of switch pages here to find the Qst Magazine is the general magazine of for ham radio. There are several others out there, but this is the one that's published for or by the league. You can actually access this magazine online now, although if you prefer, you can still have the print edition sent to you. And then you could have access to both the print and the digital. So this is the latest edition that came out probably a few days ago, because I haven't seen this one yet. And it comes out 12 times a year. And if you are interested in ham radio and you really want to find out more about it, one of the ways is to join meetings like this or the Portland Amateur Radio Club, get involved with the local ARRL groups that are around. But reading a few of the articles in the magazine every month will really broaden your mind. And because in general, ham radio is a hobby. However, it's more of an umbrella term, because under ham radio, there are so many sub hobbies, from digital radio to talking through satellites to using Morse code to communicate with people. to emergency communications, things like that. So the QST magazine is a really interesting read. Does have quite a few ads in it, which can be a plus or minus. So you'll always know kind of what the latest and greatest equipment is. But they have a lot of articles in it too. Some are geared towards beginners, and some are geared towards the more advanced people who like to build circuits. The other magazine that they just recently started publishing is called On the Air. And this just started, I believe, in 2020. It's only published 6 times a year, and the articles in it are shorter. They're usually 3 to 4 pages long, and they're really geared towards people who are just beginning in ham radio. And I'll turn to, here's an example of an article. It's on antenna tuners. So it's not necessarily like how to build the latest and greatest antenna tuner or all the different mechanics that go into it. It's more of just a very basic, this is what is in an antenna tuner. And this, for example, is a mechanical type antenna tuner, whereas this is more of a digital, or it's controlled by computer boards and relays. So those are 2 great benefits of the ARRL. And I also want to point out that there's 2 other publications. One is the National Contest Journal. And so that is a magazine that is dedicated to contesting, which is typically a contest is a date or dates and times when ham radio people get on the air, and they will try to contact or make as many contacts as they can. So there are people who are very serious into contesting, and there are people who just do it every once in a while on the weekends. The most popular in the US, at least, contest is Field Day, and it happens at the last full weekend in June. And that's when ham radio people take their ham radio gear out into outside the shack, outside the house, and they'll set up their station. And for 24 hours, they'll try to make as many contacts as possible. That's more of a fun event. And the Portland Amateur Radio Club holds their annual field day every year. A lot of fun. And then the QEX journal. And the QEX is geared towards people who are very technical. It goes into a lot of detail on circuitry and building your own circuits. So those are the 4 publications. And the National Contest Journal and QEX used to be separate subscriptions of, I think they're about $50 each. Last year, ARRL actually is giving those subscriptions, or all 4 of those magazines, away to members, people who are paid members of the ARRL.
I'll just throw a few comments in here. Check out all the magazines, even if you think, oh, that doesn't necessarily sound interesting, because you may well find something in there that, you know, is of interest. The Contest Journal, actually, even though, yes, it's geared towards contesting, has a lot of great information on equipment, setup, and use, and can answer a lot of the questions that you might have. So, you know, I would give it a glance. And it's fun to look at the QEX. You might kind of see it as like what's going on in the cutting edge of some of the technology. And I was going to backtrack real quick, as Etienne pointed out. You know, I was earlier talking about the battle between commercial and non-commercial uses for frequencies. And the FCC ruled, you know, just before the change of administrations, I think, that they gave away one of the bands that we used as hams, the 3.4 to 3.5 gigahertz, which is in the microwave range. They gave that away to commercial enterprises. You know, so these things are still happening. We're still fighting these battles. So that's a reason enough. 2 other things real quick. Let's see, forgot the one, but anyway, also radio is obviously does not stop at your country's borders. It's an international technology. and we communicate, a lot of us do communicate with hams in other countries. And so there is actually an international body called the International Amateur Radio Union, IARU, that helps to regulate and do lots of things and activities on an international basis to support ham radio throughout the world. And at some point, if you pursue this, you might even be interested in traveling, and doing ham radio overseas. And it happens a lot in third world countries, as a primary means of communication for like Doctors Without Borders and other groups who use these, the ham systems, as help. The one last thing too, we don't have to get into it, but there's always a constant debate that's been going on for almost 100 years as to the origin of the word ham. And there's, take your pick. People say, oh, those radio guys are hamming it up, or, we don't know. And again, it was one of those derogatory terms that we sort of claimed proudly, and now we're, it's stuck. So, most people even know, if they're not a radio operator, oh, you're a ham. Okay. And you'll see that quite a bit. So we wear it as a badge of honor. So
yeah, like ATN's hams initially communicated only in Morse code because voice wasn't a thing back then. And so as you use the Morse code key, you have this it's either really good or really bad, just like you can speak really well or really poorly. So that's why the commercial people used to call the amateurs like ham-fisted, because they had really poor way of communicating through Morse code. Thanks, Dan. The other, there's a lot of different things that the ARRL will kind of let you do. And one of the things is their headquarters is in Newton, Connecticut. Is that right, Dan? Newington, Connecticut.
Newington, Connecticut.
Yeah.
You can go visit the station. And if you take a license, you can even operate, they have a station there, a couple of stations you can get on the air, and which is kind of fun.
Yeah, so here's go ahead.
I was just going to say, maybe you're going to talk about the bulletins.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so here's an example of just one of the stations that they have at their headquarters. And their headquarters uses a call sign W1AW, which was Hiram Percy's call sign. And so that's kind of the station call sign that they use. So if you go there, you can show them your license, like Dan said, and you can actually use their stations to make contacts. You wouldn't use your call sign, you would actually use the W1AW call sign, which you would want to do anyway, because that would give you a lot more contacts, because there are a lot of people who want to communicate with that particular station. And as Dan mentioned, they have a lot of transmissions that come from that particular station and some other stations around the country. One of them is code practice. So they will, on, I think, Monday through Friday, different times during the day, they'll either send slow code practice or fast code practice. And the slow code starts at 5 words and goes up to 15 words, whereas the fast code practice starts at 10 words and goes up to 35 words per minute Morse code. And you can see the frequencies there at the very top. So that's one of the things that W1AW does. But they also, let's see, they also have bulletins. And you may have heard this if you tune into some local ham radio repeaters, where they have, and I can't remember the name of it, is it the Amateur Radio Newsline? They will transmit, once a week.
Right.
And I was looking for Dan,
Yeah,
do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, just a little bit. The bulletins these days are perhaps a little bit redundant in the days of email. But, for 100 years, it was the way that hams received the latest updates on, whatever the activities would be involving ham radio. And a lot of it, of course, does change on a day-to-day basis, So there's many services around those bulletins. And it used to be that, religiously, if you could, you would copy those bulletins. They do transmit in voice, and they also transmit with digital modes. But it used to be just Morse code. And I like to do Morse code because it's fun to copy, but that's me. And you can receive up-to-date information. And in times of national emergency, for instance, during some of the, in fact, I think it even happened with the Texas ice storms a few weeks ago, they immediately sent out a bulletin saying, there are certain frequencies on various bands that we ask you not to use to allow emergency traffic to, proceed. So this type of thing is, fairly up to date. And again, a lot of it these days comes via email if you sign up for the bulletins, but, it's still good to have that radio connection because who knows, the internet is fickle. It's like a simple thing based on $1 bazillion of technology. Whereas with our radios, as long as you got a battery and a wire, you can communicate.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
And Etienne, he put up in chat that regulations operating from other countries can vary substantially, which is true. Mostly in Europe, if you are a general or extra, you can actually go over to Europe and operate, because we do have some mutual agreements with other countries. You still have to kind of follow their band plans, but if you look up the requirements for if you have to register or not, most European countries, you don't necessarily have to register. You just carry your license and then a specific letter saying that you do have authorization or permission to transmit or operate your radio over there. An interesting thing is that if you are from Mexico or you have a Mexican ham radio license, you are allowed to come up to the United States and operate with no prior notice or no fee. Unfortunately, right now, if you want to take your ham radio down to Mexico and operate, it's pretty much impossible. We're supposed to have a reciprocity license, but in the past, you used to be able to pay approximately $100 and get a temporary license kind of stamped somewhere. But right now, it's not possible. However, in Canada, Americans can go to Canada and operate, and then Canadians can come down to America to the United States and operate. ARRL Store is kind of a pretty cool place to go shopping. ARRL puts out a lot of different books and publications. Probably one of the most famous one is up in the upper left-hand corner. Every year they publish a ARRL handbook. It's about the size of what the Yellow Pages used to be, and it's just chock full of articles and information on anything from how to build antennas, how to build your own radio, how to tune circuits, how to ground your station. They do put it out every year. You don't necessarily need to buy it every year because even though it is updated every year, probably once every 5 years or 7 years or so is usually good enough for most hams. They also have just individual books that cover anything from Morse code to station grounding to digital communications. So if you are interested in things like FT8 or other digital communications, they have several books that they publish. You can also buy, mugs, T-shirts, and things like that. It's very popular for Field Day to buy Field Day related things. Every year they have a new logo for Field Day, and so if you'd like to do that, you can get your T-shirt and go to Field Day.
I'll just jump in here, point out there's in addition to the handbook, which has been published continuously since 1915, and always, it's kind of like the gold standard. I highly recommend everybody get one, even if you don't understand everything that's in there. And also, they publish a bunch of really fascinating technical stuff for beginners. So there's one that's called Beginning Electronics. There's one that's just called Beginning Radio, which will help answer a lot of your questions. Like, gee, what kind of antenna should I use? What's a lot of the things that we involve ourselves with. The publications from the ARRL are really, really high quality, good authors, well laid out, and are very useful. I have a huge library of stuff that I constantly refer to. And I even look back, I've got some handbooks from like the 1930s that are gas to look at. And I love to restore and use old radios. And a lot of that information is still accurate and correct, even for the basic principles of radio. So even if you get, a used handbook, you can pick it up a lot of times, like used to be able, for instance, locally, you would always see some at Powell's, if it's 4 or 5 years old. They often will also include a CD-ROM with a lot of additional software, and I think even a searchable CD-ROM version of the handbooks, and a variety of extra information. So it's really a good investment. The bookstore also publishes books. They don't necessarily publish, but they carry a lot of other radio-related books, including some excellent ones from England. The Radio Society of Great Britain is also a superb society and has a great publishing arm. And a lot of those books are well worth taking a look at. And the ARRL will sell those on our book sites.
Yes. And like Dan said, if you want to pick up some of these books or even some older magazines that either the ARRL has published or some of the other ham radio related things, as soon as the Ham Fest start up again, the handbook, the ARRL handbook, usually one that is 5 to 10 years old, can go for anywhere from $5 to $10. I think new they cost around 50 or maybe even a little bit more. The other thing that ARRL is really involved in is emergency communications. And so I know a lot of you have mentioned that you were or are interested in emergency communications. So the organization that ARRL supports is called ARES, or Amateur Radio Emergency Services. There's an ARES group in Portland, Clackamas County, and Multnomah County. So I belong to the Clackamas County one because that's the county that I live in. But the national organization for these areas kind of all goes up to the national ARRL. So this is where a lot of the organization and the material comes from for training in emergency communications. And one of the things that happens in emergency communications is emergency nets and traffic handling. So in an emergency, for example, even the latest ones that have been happening, where power gets knocked out, communications, even cell phones still get knocked out. A lot of communication is passed through radios and amateur radios, and they will use, for formal nets, they'll use something called a radiogram. And this is a simple form on the screen is one example of an ARRL radiogram. And you can transmit these messages in either voice, digitally, or through Morse code. And typically the messages are 25 words or less. You have to make it brief because a lot of times you will have a lot of messages to pass back and forth. But this is just one example. The NTS, or the National Traffic Service, is National Traffic System, is one of the activities of the ARRL that's been happening for decades and decades, probably since the beginning of the existence of the ARRL.
Yeah, I was just going to put this up here. This is the 1930 handbook. And here's the radiogram, which actually looks pretty similar, in many ways to the current one. And yeah, it's just a lot of fun. And the whole point of this is this hobby has deep roots, and people have been, hams for many, many generations and active in it. So, to me personally, that just makes it kind of fun because you're sort of part of a bigger realm. We tend to think of this just in the short term. I'm getting my handheld, I'm going to do emergency communication. But what could be fun if you want to is you can realize that this has got a very deep tradition and a lot of facets to the hobby that, could make it fun, to investigate.
Yeah, absolutely. And one last thing I'd just like to mention about Age of ARRL is that the membership is pretty inexpensive when it comes to the benefits that you get. I see that they're adding a lot of new benefits. I haven't been on the website for a couple months, but I noticed that they have a learning network, which includes webinars that members can either attend live or view the recordings of. So that's something new and something I haven't seen before. But here's their webinar schedule, for example. Looks like they have one coming up on for a more beginning ham radio person, Life Beyond Repeaters. They have the art and science of operating ultra portable. And Mike Ritz, who is our division director and who's going to be joining us at the Portland Amateur Radio Club on Monday, he looks like he did one on HF noise mitigation. To become a member, they recently as in like three or 4 years ago, raised their price to a whopping $49 per year. And remember, that includes 4 publications that they have. So it's really not a bad deal. If you want, you can even become a life member. Current price for life membership is $1,225. Depends on how young you are. I think they do give a break for people who are over 70. It's certainly, I'm a life member myself. I became a life member in 2001, so I'm going to be breaking even here in just a year or two, and then the rest is gravy. Any questions on either this topic or any other topic ham radio related?
I'll just throw a question out there. I've recently kind of gotten interested in radio controlled airplanes. Mm-hmm. And I just noticed that there are some, let's see, I guess they would be transmitter receivers that say now you have to have a ham license in order to use those frequencies. So I don't even know how that's possible, but I found it interesting.
Yeah, so the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, they are the ones that are responsible for assigning frequencies from anything from pacemakers to cell phones to the AM or FM broadcast stations and even ham radio operators. So I think that they have there are a few frequencies that they give to the general public for things like flying model airplanes or even drones. And as those, especially with drones, as they're getting more and more popular, they're getting more crowded. You generally can't transmit much more than half a watt or 1 watt, as I remember, without a specific kind of either commercial license or ham radio license. And it's always been that if you were into model aircraft, and this was before the time of drones, getting your ham radio license was one of the best ways and one of the most inexpensive ways to get more frequencies and higher power for model aircraft. Mm-hmm. So you're able to, with your ham radio license, use those frequencies And this is kind of one of those weird things that normally when you're transmitting on ham radio bands, you have to identify you as the station or as the transmitting person. And the rule is it's for voice and Morse code and digital, it's once every 10 minutes and once at the end of the conversation. With a couple exceptions, and one of those is for remote control aircraft and drones. And the way that you identify those is that you put a label or a flag on the transmitter that you're holding to control that aircraft. And so you might have a little pendant that has your call sign on it. And so that's how you would identify your station. But yeah, I don't know the exact power limits, but I think that it's definitely more than you would ever need if you were flying your drone or your model aircraft. And I know from my experience with drones, it's one of the issues that you do get good line of sight, because it's not like you're flying a drone in a canyon and you're standing up on another hill somewhere. Usually it's pretty good line of sight. However, with the particular bands that the FCC allows you to use and the limited amount of power that they allow you to use, it does become a limiting factor. And so that's why a lot of people who do fly model aircraft or drones end up getting their ham radio license so that they can use the higher, the better bands and the higher power.
Max, now I thought some of the remote control stuff was on 6 meters, but have they moved up to the microwave ranges as well?
Yeah, I believe they have.
Yeah,
and
okay.
I should look it up. Maybe somebody else knows more, but I believe you can use 2 meter, 70 centimeter and higher.
Right.
I want to say these radios are at 900 megahertz or some. I could be wrong about that, but
okay. Yeah, they may be. There's a variety of ham bands up there. Maybe E10. Do you know a little more about that? You're kind of our.
I think John's right. It's the 900 or 1.2 gigahertz.
Right.
Those channels are.
Yeah.
And one thing to keep in mind is not just the control of the aircraft, but now, because cameras have shrunk, it's sending back the audio and video that you get from drones and model aircraft that's really important. So that's the higher bandwidth information that you want to get back. 4K real-time TV from a drone or a model aircraft is really cool. Unfortunately, with the bands that you're limited to without a license, it can get very difficult.
Right. I think some of the emergency groups like ARRL and others are beginning to look at using, drones or other type of hovercraft to be able to, access pictures and information, from an emergency site where they couldn't get in on foot, like if there was an earthquake and a building collapse or something of that nature, they could access that information, by drone and get live pictures. So, that's something that's
Yeah,
great.
there's a group of ham radio operators that will jump out of airplanes, they'll skydive, and on their way down, they'll make contacts. And so these guys, they have 6 or 7 different radios. But one of the things that that group is experimenting with is using amateur TV or ATV to as they're dropping down, they are transmitting television signals back to the ground, showing live video of the jump. And the guy had this, he kind of mentioned, well, this is our first version, here's our second version. And they learned things like strapping an antenna to your leg isn't always the best place. Doing it on your foot or somewhere away from the body produces a little bit of a better signal.
Mm-hmm. Right. One other point about the ARRL, and this is not often used, and a lot of even regular members who join aren't too aware of it, but it's a wonderful resource, is their technical assistance. basically for any ham, if you have issues, of a technical nature, gee, I can't get this antenna to work, or I'm having trouble with these various things. The league has technical advisors that will directly contact you. Usually these days, I think it's almost always by email. But also there are local advisors, like for instance, we have one for the Northwest Division. And, you could probably get on a phone call with them, and their job is to help you sort out technical issues with your station or radio problems. And, that's what they do. So that's a great service that, that I think not a lot of us even take advantage of. Sometimes, you're stumped on something, you can't get an answer, and it's a very useful resource. So one I wouldn't hesitate to use. There's some sharp minds out there. A lot of these guys have done a lot of the stuff that we try to do a few times over. So it's useful.
So,
Yeah, Dan,
about the antenna drop-off locations. Is that from your antenna project then?
Oh, I'm sorry. What?
I think
oh yeah.
something in Woodstock about an antenna drop-off from your antenna projects.
Oh, is that in the chat?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, so Bridget, I haven't dropped off the antennas in Southeast Portland yet. I plan to do that tomorrow. I had some people come over today to pick up in Oregon City. And so we have, for those of you who don't know, we have an antenna kit that our February meeting was on. And it's kind of an easy 2-meter kit that you can build at home. And one of the best things that you can do if you have a HT handheld radio is to get a better antenna for it, especially if you're going to use it from home. So we've been building these antennas, and I've been putting kits together as fast as I could. And I think I only expected to put a few kits together, but I think we have 30 people now that have ordered kits.
yeah. I had a few folks come by today and pick up theirs. And just to make the link with this current topic, this comes from the October 2020 issue of the QST, is where we got the idea for, kitting this antenna up. And there was an article in that issue of the magazine that said, hey, we could do this. And so that's worked out to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a fun antenna build, and apologize. I'm trying to get them the kits kitted up as fast as I can, and I appreciate your patience.
Yeah. But you found the tape and you got everything else.
I did. I found the tape, and I had to order more.
Okay, good. Yeah. It's turned out to be a fun antenna, very useful.
Yeah.
Very, nice low profile, but very effective 2-meter antenna. So
cool. Anybody else with ham radio questions?
This is for Dan. I just have a end-fed half-wave antenna, and I've been using FT8, and I'm able to hit Asiatic Russia, Japan, Fiji, Australia, just fine. But I can't get past the East Coast. Am I going to need a beam eventually to be able to hit Europe and stuff from the West Coast?
Well, and we might have Etienne chime in on this because he's got a little bit of experience in this field too. Basically, the NFEDs can be somewhat directional, depending on how they're laid out. And sure, ideally, a beam is a great antenna if you can do that, but you can do quite a bit with wire antennas. And a lot of that is the orientation and the height above ground. For instance, it's much tougher to work Europe from the West Coast than it is for the East Coast. That's just one of the, basics of what we face.
Fully understand that. So.
Yeah. Hey, Jan, how much directionality on the NFEDs? What's your take on that?
Oh, it's just a half wave. So broadside to it is just the same as any dipole. So
Okay,
want to point it kind of north, look at a great circle chart and make sure that your antenna might be oriented that direction. The other thing too, do you get up real early? Because they're, 8 to 10 hours ahead of us.
right. Yeah, I've heard, I was on 20 meters the other, actually for me, because I tend to stay up late rather than get up early, but it was, past midnight, and I was hearing the Norwegians, Swedes, Danish stations pretty clearly on, 40 meters, some of those. So they're out there.
On a wire antenna?
Yeah, yeah. What I have is what's called basically it's a variation of an antenna called a delta loop. It has a little bit of extra gain over a dipole or infed half wave, particularly on 20 meters. So it has a little bit more gain, not a great deal, but I'm sure that those could even be heard on a dipole if you get the orientation correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So
That's a little out of my pocketbook right now.
what band do you, if it's an infed half wave, is that right?
Yeah, it's a polymer, it's a BAS 71. It's a 71 foot wire with they call it a bullet on the end of it. It's a transformer balance.
Okay. And
And
is it
991A will tune it all the way from 1.8, from 160 meters all the way down to 6.
right?
So I've had a lot of fun with it so far.
Great.
It's basically pointed northwest, south, yes, northwest to southwest. It's a slightly sloped. I've got it up on my house is almost a 2-story. It's a split, and I put a 10-foot hunk of
Right.
PVC up on the chimney. So it's about 30 feet high on the feed point and strung straight out in a sloper mode down to about 20 feet.
Right.
So,
To get the Europeans, probably 20 meters at this point is going to be your money band. And as sunspot cycles start to include, to pick up a little bit, which they are gradually, 17 and maybe eventually 15. When you get to the
15.
peak of the solar cycle,
Yeah,
you'll be able to do
last
that.
Sunday, with 10 watts, I worked New York, Virginia, Illinois, Michigan, Mississippi, and Oregon.
Yep.
On 15 meters TW. And it was, people have actually worked, there's a French a station that chases summits on the air that people work pretty regularly these days, F4WBN. So they're making it across the pond to the east, to the west coast. So it is happening. But 15 meters might be something to try. It may sound dead, but sometimes it's actually going. It worked really well. Oh, my reports were really great, both ways on 15 meters.
So that was all on 15.
Yeah, those are all on
Yeah.
15.
what time of day?
About 1 o'clock in the afternoon,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah,
kind of,
I was out Monday doing a sort of thing with basically an infed random wire antenna in a not great situation, sort of a compromised structure, but I was able to work pretty well around the country, plus some Japanese stations. And I was running 5 watts, and with the high SWR that I had, my effective radiating power was probably half that. But the band was very quiet and things were good. So, I was certainly getting, across the Pacific, no problem, with about 2.5 watts effective power on Morse code.
I think I've hit Japan with 10.
Yeah.
And that's just where I had it. My radio will go down to 5. So
Right.
I just been playing right now with, I've got a lot of noise. I've got to figure out where it's coming from. But on the FT8, it's in between my noise bands.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway, I was
nice.
just curious.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
And for those of
during
you who are,
class- Pardon?
I was just going to say, for those of you who are wondering, like we talk about the different bands. These are all the bands or all the frequencies that ham radio people can use. So depending on your license, you can use either some or all of them. Right now, there's only 3 licenses for a ham radio in the US. There's Technician, which is the first one. And Technician really is great because it gives you a lot of frequencies. So you can use anything 50 megahertz on up. And so that is right here at the 6-meter band. You can use all of these frequencies, and there are quite a few. Then General is the next one, and General opens up almost all. You get, I think, I don't know what it is, 85, 90% of the frequencies, and then Extra is the final class of license. And with that, you can get everything that you see here on this page for operating privileges.
Max, we have a question in there about a technician class where they can use FTA. I'm not sure which bands, HF bands. What's the current?
Yeah, so for Technician, you're limited to Morse code on 80 meters, 40 meters, and 15 meters. I think that you can use FT8 on the higher frequencies, such as 6 meters, 2 meters, but expect your range to be a lot less because those are more local bands. 6 meters might get you a few hundred to a couple thousand miles, but if you really want to use the digital modes, for right now, you'll need to get your general license, and that will give you most of the frequencies in the HF or high frequency bands. And those are the ones that you want to use for talking around the world.
Max, aren't they? The technicians are a lot on 10 meters, aren't they?
They are, but for voice, SSB voice only, or RIDI, or yeah, I guess, yeah. So that they can use data on 10 meters.
Yeah.
But I'm
Yeah.
not sure. Does anybody use FT8 on 10 meters? Have you gotten very far?
I think it's all a function probably right now of the sunspot cycle. And there's times when 10 opens up.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, so you could probably, I would say a few hundred miles, maybe more on 10 meters using digital.
Yeah.
But 20 meters, 40 meters, those are the bands that you really want to use digital on, simply because you have the greatest chance of going several thousand miles, especially with either Morse code or digital. Cool. Any other questions?
Oh, yeah, there's some more here in the chat, so I'm not sure what.
Yeah,
I
so
mean,
Stevie asked oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, you can answer those.
Oh, I was just gonna, so Stevie asked, is it, I think her question is, can they do Morse code on 80 meters? Is that your question, Stevie?
So I was just using the CW as a comparison, like how techs have the 70 centimeters, 2 meters for voice and such, but then we are kind of allowed like the upper stuff, but only for CW. And so I was trying to use that as a way for my brain to understand FT8. I have this goal. I have a group of friends and they have this FT8 off and I can't play it, but I want to. So I'm very motivated.
Yeah.
Trying to understand. It's way over my head. So thank you. I appreciate you guys.
I can tell you FT8 is not nearly as difficult as Morse code. Morse code is something that you have to learn, and your brain is the computer. FT8 is a digital mode, so the computer is actually doing all the processing, and it's a lot of fun. FT8 is. and there's right now seems like there's a new digital mode that's invented every 6 months, and FT8 happens to be one of the latest ones. And it is you would need to use the red sections there, or some of the red sections that you see on the band plan, which I'm going to put back up, for FT8, because it is a digital mode. And so as a technician, they FCC kind of designed the technician general and extra licenses to be incentive licensing, meaning that you can play a little bit with Morse code on HF bands or HF frequencies, but you can only do really Morse code on the 80 meters and the 40 meters and 15 meters. If you wanted to use voice and other digital modes on the HF bands, you have to upgrade to a general. And so that's kind of why they call it incentive licensing.
That's the most thorough explanation that I've got. You need to put that on the internet. Thank
Cool.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be a little confusing at first, but Kirk, maybe you could comment. I mean, how hard did you find it to set up your FTA for use?
Yeah, I'm unmuted. The hardest thing probably was getting a good video or written explanation for my particular HF radio, which is a Yaesu 991A.
Oh, right.
And if I had to make a synopsis of it, it basically came down to turn off all your filtering.
Oh, okay.
It was really what it came down to.
Yeah.
Whatever radio you have, you either have to have a USB port on the radio that's designed to work like a sound card. If your radio does not have that, there are devices out there, and I forget the name of them right now, that can interface through one of the other types of ports that you probably have on the back of your HF radio. It doesn't take very much to set up the software. You put your call sign in, a few other parameters, license data, location code, a few other things. And when you start it up, if everything's working right, if your radio's turned off, it'll turn on your radio in my case. You tell it what band, it sets their frequency. And then for whatever band you pick, and you tell it to start transmitting. I mean, there's a little bit more than that to it, but once you've done it, it's really pretty simple. And I can bounce around between the modes and things and try to figure out where I'm getting. One thing I've found helpful, which would be helpful for voice or phone, is what they call it, phone, right? Not voice. There is there's a site, if you type in WSPR or Whisper, the first hit you'll get on Google is a service that tracks people who are listening to different signals and things on the different bands, and it'll show you, it's a very low power signal that gives you an idea what kind of propagation you're getting on what bands. If you're transmitting and on the frequency for the Whisper, and you put in your call sign in the map, it'll bring up who's ever hearing you on Whisper. So it gives you an idea where you might be able to transmit. And specifically for FT8, there is Psk Reporter. And again, if you just Google that, you'll get the right place. It shows, if you don't put your call sign in, you'll get a whole bunch of hits. And if you are transmitting and put your call sign in, it'll show you who's at least reporting that they hear you. So that kind of gives you an idea of how far you may be getting out and that sort of thing. So it's not too bad. The program is called WSJT-X. And if you go out and download that, It doesn't install, and it's like any other Windows program. And it can be very flexible, or you can use it very much in a very basic mode. It will even log the contacts you have. When you click on, if somebody's calling CQ with FT8, you can click on that particular line, and it populates about 5 or 6 lines of exchanges back and forth. So if somebody says CQ, you come back and answer them. They send you a signal report. You send them a signal report. And basically you both end up saying 73s. And if you have it turned on, a little window will pop up with the contact information, and that program will log it on your QSL. And then if you are using like Logbook of the World and those sorts of things, you can eventually upload it. So I've had a lot of fun with it so far. Like I've mentioned, I've got some noise issues here that I still need to track down. That's external to my house. And luckily the FT8 bands are in between my noise. So where I've had some problems doing any kind of voice contact sometimes, the FT8's been very workable. So.
Great, thank you. Yeah. I think it's a fun mode for a lot of folks to play with, and you know, particularly in this time of propagation and high noise, it can be quite useful.
Can I add
so-
one thing?
Go ahead,
Oh,
Stevie.
sure. Go ahead.
I don't know, but just in case there's anybody else that's new out there, like I am, and actually starting without a computer at all, I found this small computer-like thing called a Raspberry Pi. And it's like a single board computer, and it's around $30. And then you can get a SD card with something called HamPi on it, and it's that WSJTX suite. And you just plug it into the SD thing. That's as far as I've gotten. So technically you don't need a computer, although I'm still in the process of waiting for a SD card from the UK. So that just so that you don't get demotivated when you start wanting to do it and you're like, oh, computers are like $1,000. So anyways, there's that.
Yeah, and that's actually a really good option, because a lot of times for ham radio use, you want kind of a dedicated computer. And there's nothing wrong with Raspberry Pi. It works really well for ham radio. And that way you can kind of set it up so that you're not doing things like transmitting out YouTube videos that happen to be in another browser. So that's a great option. And thanks for bringing that up, Stevie. And FT8 is just one of many digital modes. It is somewhat automatic. The messages are very short. And there's something new I have not tried yet called FT8 Call. And FT8 Call is a little bit more like text messaging back and forth. And for some people, it could be a little bit more interesting because the messages can be longer. You can send out 1 or 2 or 3 sentences. Obviously, the more sentences or more words you send out, the longer it takes to exchange the information, but it can be more interesting for people who want more than just call sign, grid square, and 73.
Right. Yeah, I think the use of the pies is starting to creep into some of the portable operations that I see as well. So.
Yeah, and Marino put up.
I was going to say the pies are very, very flexible.
Yeah.
There's people out there actually getting Windows to work on one if you really, really want to do Windows stuff, but it's basically used for Linux. So if you can get like you said, the SD card that has everything installed for you already and kind of a turnkey, they are a computer. They're just all built on a single board, about the size of a 3x5 card, a little taller. I've got a couple of them I've played with over the years. So they can be very powerful. Sometimes they'll outrun your tablet that you have if it's an older tablet. So.
Yeah, there's a lot of, in fact, I think the Raspberry Pi was how they were doing some of the operations during the group that does the parachute mobile ham radio operators that jump out of the airplanes, because they're not going to want to carry a tablet or even a Surface with them. They want something more lightweight, a little bit less power hungry. And Marino, I see. Hi, Marino. He
Hey,
put up
guys.
a link to JS8 call, which is what I was referring to. I think that it's called JS8 call instead of FT8 call. So you may want to take a look at that if you want some more, a different type of digital mode that's more geared towards people that want to exchange more information. Cool. I think we have time for one more question if anybody has a question. And if not, I'm going to display our upcoming future meeting topics. So next week, we'll talk about amateur radio band plans. Part of it is what I put up before, which was the ARRL, the national band plan, but there are even local band plans and even organization-specific band plans that we'll kind of take a look at. Then we have battery backup. Bruce Schaefer is going to come back and talk to us about that. Ham radio resources. These are things like apps or books, websites, logging and QSLs, emergency communications, and I believe Bruce signed up for that also. That'll be great because that's so up his alley. HF radio overview, and homebrew and kit building. So if you're interested in any of these, or you just have other questions ham radio related, or get stuck somewhere, please come back on Thursday at 6 o'clock. And I'll be sending out emails every week, at least a couple days before these meetings. And if you get a chance, go to the club website. Put that up here, w7lt.org, and register for the upcoming meeting this Monday at 7 o'clock.
Max?
All right, yeah, go ahead.
I see batteries are mentioned and upcoming. What about, do you foresee anything regarding solar power sources as a topic ever?
We cover that a little bit in the battery section that's coming up. I don't have anything specific coming up I mapped it out, I think, until end of September, end of October. I don't have anything specific, but if that's of interest to you guys, I can definitely put a dedicated topic to that. Solar panels are definitely the way to go if you have an amateur station at home and you want to make sure it's on the air even when the electricity is not going to your house.
Yeah, I'm sort of responsible for our net to come up with a solar power system for our communications for our net, and I realize I'm not adequately technically trained to do that. I would really be interested if not a solar system. Speaking about solar specifically, if I knew how to find someone who could review our plans and provide technical advice from time to time, that would be really helpful to us. We can do the research, but we don't know if we're putting it all together the right way or using the right math to come up with the sizing of what we need.
Yeah, I'll just jump in here.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. Go ahead, Dan.
Oh, a couple of resources. Yeah, I mean, we should be able to address the basics at the battery backup since the two are really linked. But I'm going to point you to one resource, which is a podcast called Ham Radio Workbench.
Okay.
And what you want to do is, oh boy, if you look through the various episodes, there's one particular episode that is dealing strictly with exactly that issue of solar, all the issues involved with solar panels, solar controllers, how to calculate, what kind of resources that you would need. the right kind of batteries, and it's a very comprehensive overview. The whole podcast is great. All the issues, they cover things in great depth. But go back and look for the solar one, and I'll try to remember to track down the exact episode. But I think if you go on their website, you should be able to find that one.
Okay. Hey, Dan, can I reach you at your ARRL address if I wanted to send you a note?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that would be great.
Another good local resource is a company that sells a lot of different things, including solar controllers, which is Buddy Pole.
Buddy Pole.
But-
Okay.
Yeah, Buddy Pole, which is in Hillsboro, and they've been around quite a long time. Mostly known for their antennas, their portable antennas, which are very interesting. But over the past few years, they've also gotten into some of the solar systems, not complete, but at least some of the aspects of it, including basically a controller, which is the interface between the panel and your batteries, which is kind of the big key to making the whole thing work.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Sure. Yeah, just drop me an email. I'll pass that stuff on. I may have some more resources too.
Sure.
I'd like to just put out a comment too regarding batteries. I'm, with the storm that we had recently and all, I've been given a lot of thought to this. And I guess one of the points I would make is, what else might you want to do with your battery supply besides run your ham radio? And it's a work in progress, but I'm thinking right now the sweet spot in my mind is a 200 amp hour lithium battery, because that's big enough to run an inverter large enough that you can run your furnace in your house. And if you've got a long stretch of where there's not enough sunlight to charge your solar panels, then you got some headroom.
Yes, that's very important. Even if you think you are on propane or on natural gas, sometimes there is that electric requirement that you have to think about. I did put for Lee and everybody else in the chat there, I just put it under general battery and solar panel. There's a young guy on YouTube that does a lot of videos. His name is, I'll have to remember it, but his videos are great. He does a lot of teardowns of lithium ion batteries. He also shows you very basic, like this is how you would set up a solar panel system, and he'll actually just build it right there on the YouTube channel. And then the other one was the ham radio workbench that Dan specifically was referring to. It was about a year or so ago, and it was somebody from a company called Genasun. The one thing that you have to be careful about solar power and ham radio is that a lot of the solar controllers will put out a lot of just bad RF energy or RF interference. So if you are a ham radio and you want to operate while you're charging your batteries, make sure that you go with a solar controller like Genasun or something else that doesn't produce a lot of RFI.
Oh, good point. Thank you.